Analysts there. What a match we have ahead of us today. Magnus Carlsen, Hans Niemann, best of friends or best of enemies, who knows? Huge match ahead. Best of two, could come down to an Armageddon. Tanya, what are you expecting?
David, I'll tell you one thing. We're in Paris. It's the city of love. But right now at the Allianz Vault, there is no love to be found. Now, this is not just a group stage match. Whenever it's Magnus versus Hans, Magnus there going into zone just like that. That matchup carries history with it. Every single move will be watched. It's Liquid Legacy versus Godlike Ambition for a spot in the playoffs.
Exactly, and of course the history, we could talk about that all day, but the form they've shown today, Magnus sneaking past Esipenko, not easy at all. Hans Niemann had a topsy-turvy rollercoaster encounter against Jan Nepomniachtchi, looked like he was on the brink of elimination, but made it through. And both players hopefully have played themselves into form right now. I'm hoping they're both at their best. A tight match would be phenomenal to watch.
A thumbs up there for Magnus Carlsen. He nods his head right there. He's ready to go. He starts in their best of two with the white pieces. Does he have a surprise up his sleeve? An early surprise for Hans Niemann.
And Magnus has played the Catalan opening earlier today. Will he do the same now? Will he switch it up? Hans Niemann tends to be quite predictable in the openings, at least against the top players. He tends to be rock solid with black. Berlin defense is his favorite. Game's about to start now. Here we go. It is E4, E5. Will we see an Italian? No, it's a Spanish opening. And mainline stuff here. Hans not playing his beloved Berlin.
So far, very much in the theoretical realms right now is Magnus versus Hans. No more Queen Spawn opening by Magnus in this one. He retreats the attacked bishop. Early days. Are we going to see a potential break in the center by Hans Niemann, who was threatening the marshal, but denied?
But denied. Magnus is going to try and make this as quiet as possible, it seems like. A lot of maneuvering in the Roy Lopez, the Spanish opening. And Magnus has a crossroads here. He can slowly start to develop his pieces, maneuver. Hans looking away. This is classical stuff. These positions have been analyzed so deeply, but there is room to try and still exert your own character on the position.
It suits Magnus Carlsen just perfectly. We often speak about how in strategic positional battles it's so incredibly hard. You just get outplayed by the world number one. It will be critical for Hans Niemann to keep his dynamics, his combative play chances alive. And so much of that, David, depends if he's able to get that deep on in front of the queen, moving forward, opening up some diagonals and files for his queen and bishop.
Exactly. First, a more modest pawn push. The Black Queen can still develop at a later stage. Magnus now can choose where to put his queenside knight. White's knight still asleep. He's going to trade off rooks first, asking the Black Queen if she wants to leave the center of the board. Maybe a bit offside, but also on a nice open file. Big decision now for Hans Niemann.
And maybe a bigger decision lies ahead because Magnus is ready to develop his knight, attacking that B pawn on the left flank that Hans Niemann has, and some decisions will be required at that point. Knight to C3 right now, played by Magnus Carlsen. It's not only hinting at a pawn capture, but an eventual trade of that bishop versus knight and complete control of the central squares. A pawn sacrifice.
Yeah, it's a gambit from Hans Niemann. He wants the Spanish bishop, White's light squared bishop. Such a good piece in this opening. Has just been traded off. Magnus now has weak, doubled, isolated pawns, but he has more of those little foot soldiers. One pawn to the good, but great compensation here for Hans Niemann. Bishop pair and a better structure.
We spoke about how important it is for Hans to create those imbalances. He's done just that with the decision that he's taken right now. He needs to now think about how he wants to push the pieces back, and he comes in with some tactical ideas, X-raying that knight that Magnus has with some tricks up the board. Bishop takes pawn. Watch out, Magnus Carlsen.
Yeah, White's knight that has done some good work. Needs to retreat. There we go. It was on a loose, undefended square. Back towards the center. Magnus might try and open things up. Counterintuitive, perhaps, because bishops like those open lines. But against the bishop pair, you do want to accelerate the play. The bishop now, I was going to say kicked back, but a trade. It's two knights versus two bishops. This is going to be very interesting, a very unbalanced middle game.
It's also 7 versus 6 if you do the pawn count right now. But Magnus's pawn formation on that left flank creates some weaknesses, targets for Hans to get to once the bishop steps out of the way. For now, enough compensation for the pawn that's just been gambited.
That is for sure enough, but is it more than enough? Does Black have serious winning chances, or is Black just playing to try and win back the pawn and equalize? Magnus moves his queen off the back rank. Now the White rook has some access to some very decent squares, Black's bishop's a bit stuck due to the center being blocked. Hans Niemann puts his queen back on the open file.
And he's putting it on a square where it's ready to double up with its rook for complete control of the A-line if it is so needed. Also vacating that B8 square where the queen has just moved from for the rook to land in for future targets right there. I'm expecting a bishop slide, but he goes another way, does Hans Niemann. He consolidates, takes away some squares from Magnus's knight to jump on.
Yeah, interesting move, though, because he's encouraging Magnus to step forward. White has doubled pawns on the B line. If you step one of them forward, as he has just done, does Hans trade off and say, okay, I've undoubled your pawns, you're a clear pawn up? Magnus had that same situation against Yesipenko earlier in the day. Or does he bypass this pawn, argue it's weak and hard to defend long term? Tanya, what are you taking? Are you taking the material, the extra pawns, or are you taking the bishop pair?
After this last move, I'm taking the extra pawn right now. Bishop pair only as strong as the open diagonals that you have, and that dark squared bishop of Hans. I don't see a very bright future for that right now. And a very healthy extra pawn now that the weakness has been traded off by Magnus Carlsen. Simply retreat with the knight, make a case for having the B pawn as a passer for the rest of the game. Advantage white.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like Magnus is risking less, at least. Even if Black is able to equalize, it will be a hard uphill battle, a lot of accuracy needed. Magnus, worst comes to worst, should be able to give back the pawn and guide this game towards safety. Impressive clock handling, it should be mentioned, for both players so far, still with plenty of time. We're now 21 moves in, and they still have a majority of their time on the clock. But the Black Rook has finally come to life, eye-lining a White Knight, the Queen behind it. It might be time for the other White Knight to enter the action at some point. The White Rook needs to be improved. Lots on the agenda.
Well, you're talking about all the improvements that Magnus need to do. I'll say one thing for one of the pieces that Hans has, that bishop that we've been highlighting on f6. It has a nice route. You fall back next to the rook and then realign yourself next to the Black Queen into a nice diagonal. If you're Hans Niemann, watch out for a bishop retreat only to go forward.
Exactly. Black's dark square bishop, the worst placed piece. When in doubt, improve it. Magnus there, wiping his eyes, not looking the most energetic yet, but it isn't the type of position that demands too much energy. We should mention the White Queen is lined up with Black's light square bishop, so Black's Queen can't really move away right now, grab any pawns, for example. It is, very slow, positional, strategic grind from Magnus. It definitely feels like he's playing against the opponent. He's kind of designed this game, this match strategy, specifically for Hans here.
And David, Magnus just does that so well. Read the position, read the opponent as well, as Hans does improve, but it's the other bishop for now. You know, for Magnus Carlsen, it's not often about posing one big tactical problem, but instead 20 small questions when your opponent's clock is ticking low, and that's so much harder to respond.
Exactly. You could answer 19 of those questions correctly. You could be pretty happy about life, but if you answer the last one wrong, you might end up paying the price. We've seen it so many times with even elite players against Magnus Carlsen. Magnus now just pushing his pawn forward, and this is a really nice tactic. Let's show what might happen if Hans Niemann grabs a pawn in the center. It's the most tempting move, the most human move. The Black Queen is staring at an undefended pawn, and Hans, he could be tempted to take it. It wouldn't be a long-term pawn gain. The pawn would be dropping off anytime soon. Queen takes on d3, and the White Rook would slide across to d1.
Yes.
d6 would be hanging at the end.
Wow, and that's for on pre right now. It is Hans's decision, and the big question will be, once the rook lines up against the Black Queen and the pawn, if queen takes pawn was to happen right now, David, rook d1 is a response that you need to have an answer to, as the d6 pawn right behind the queen is being x-rayed as well, and Magnus would remain up a pawn. Instead, another approach by Hans Niemann right now. He says, I'm not going to trade the d-pawns just yet. I leave you, Magnus, with your weakness. I continue improving my pieces.
Yeah, this is something you've been calling out for a while, Tanya. That Black Bishop was pretty much dead, staring at its own pawns. It wants a more prosperous diagonal, ideally maybe even lining up with the White King. Black's Bishop's pretty decently placed, and a very good move there from Hans Niemann.
And this might be the moment that you need to seize, because if not now, Magnus might not ever get that central break in. Now that the eye is off the d4 square by that dark square bishop, Magnus can strike in the center.
Yeah, that's the rule, right? You go back, I go forward. Black has just retreated the bishop. White now could march his pawn forward in the center, and it looks like this might be the moment for Magnus to change the pace and start to go for it.
Feels like a cat and mouse game so far, and it's been Hans Niemann who's been on the mouse side of things, just being a bit cagey, down a pawn, finding that compensation, but maybe slightly just struggling for it. 6 minutes to Hans, 5.5 to Magnus Carlsen. Does he lash out with the central break?
He does. He was trying to maybe control his impatience there. He wants to create the action. Of course he does, but ultimately it was the right moment to do so. And Magnus did decide to push forward. A capture in the center for black would be on white's terms. White's knight would be able to leap forward to a very, very nice square. So pressure. Suddenly black uneasy here, feeling uncomfortable about this tension.
I have to say, though, Hans has been fantastic in this game so far, sacrificing an early pawn and finding ways to improve the position of his pieces. Look at the rook on the open C line, the queen on the open A line, one bishop nicely poised on the longest diagonal, the other ready to join the party. But it's a whole extra pawn for Magnus Carlsen. So for Hans, he needs to continue the momentum. Where is he finding it? The E5 pawn, the central pawn, now under fire.
And that's the hardest thing, right? You've played great, you've made loads of logical moves, you've improved your pieces, but you're playing against the GOAT and you're a pawn down. Suddenly you're down on time as well. Hans Niemann still needs to continue playing accurately, and this might be the biggest question he's faced so far on this move. To trade, not to trade. If not, what to do? He moves his queen forward, defending along the 5th rank, controlling the central pawns, but Magnus can continue improving. He can maybe step forward his pawns in the center, or he could just activate the white rook.
Defends the pawn for right now. Does Hans Niemann. Getting ready again to get that bishop on the b6 square. A better place, and Magnus trades. Is he ready to jump in with a knight to the central post, disconnecting the black queen from that central pawn? He first reinforces the defenses on the d line, activates his rook, does Magnus. Knight d5, a threat on the board.
Yeah, it's so rare to see two knights just as strong as a bishop pair, especially because it's pretty open now, but white's knights are about to jump, about to land in the center, and Magnus, I think he's pretty confident here. Evaluation bar says, advantage white. It's not at the +1 mark. White is a pawn up, so it's not a full pawn. There is compensation. Black's bishop's looking good, but Hans is definitely the one who needs to prove it.
It's going to come down to a time scramble. It might be a flag fest at the end of it right now. So many imbalances. You've got two knights versus two bishops. You've got an extra pawn for Magnus. Two majors on the board right now. With this last move, Hans Niemann also hinting at a tender spot next to the white king, the f2 pawn.
Yeah, I should mention, Tanya, Magnus, we're so used to seeing his heart rate pretty stable around the 80-90 mark maximum. He's had a heart rate of over 110 now. I think that just shows how much he wants it. The knight's jumped in, it's been captured, bishop pair gone. But this game, this match means more to them than most, that's for sure.
It's not a heart rate, it's the Hans rate for Magnus right now that we're seeing with 114. And this is what I was talking about, David, the queen and the bishop battery. Watch out, queen takes pawn, a big threat. If you move your rook up the board on the 2nd rank for a defense, there are checks that you need to be careful about. Also, Hans's e-pawn ready to march up the board. Magnus looking a little uncomfortable.
Yeah, he might have just rushed slightly, Magnus Carlsen, with his knight jump into the center, maybe underestimating the pressure on the diagonal. Magnus now has had to bring his rook back where it came from, back next to the white king, purely a passive square. Shake of the head, Magnus not happy at all. Still a pawn up, but suddenly black is very active. White has two isolated pawns. The black central pawn can push forward. Momentum, Hans Niemann.
Wow, and I just want to point out that Hans has the option to push that pawn, hit that knight on f3. Now that he's made the white rook passive as well, there are also ways for the black rook to start targeting the white queen. It just feels like Magnus has been forced into going into a defense when that's not what he was looking for. His most active piece is off the board, and it's Hans on the momentum.
Yeah, let's just show that variation. You mentioned rook lining up with the queen. There would be a huge trap here if white gets greedy. Knight takes pawn. There would be a devastating tactic, a queen sacrifice in order to open up the black rook. And this would end up in a big advantage materially for Hans. So there are lots of interesting moves here, pushing the pawn forward, maybe the most natural of the bunch. But Hans needs to keep that flow he's been picking up over the last few moves. Clock ticking down, heart rate high, but he needs to keep going.
Get an unbalanced position and have more time on the clock. That is Hans Niemann's chance against the world #1. So far, he's been doing just that. A rook under attack right now with Magnus's last move. There's also a pawn at the center of the board that you need to be careful about. He targets Magnus's pawn instead. Attack, the best form of defense.
Yeah, Magnus's pawn in the center, the white pawn is about to drop off, so he might as well grab something else in return. The white knight most likely has to retreat now. White still a pawn to the good. The position is clarifying though. Bishops tend to be better than knights with pawns on both flanks. Such an open board. Should be full compensation. But how many times have we seen it, Tanya? Magnus, tiny advantage, something to hold on to, something to grind with in an endgame. It feels like Magnus, it's a 2-result position. He shouldn't be losing unless something crazy happens.
It's that kind of position where if Magnus gets the B pawn rolling up the board, he can create some actual liquid pressure. But until then, you've got Hans with his own ideas. The queen, bishop, and rook beautifully placed. Magnus does what he does every time, centralizes his queen. It's one of his favorite moves in chess.
That is for sure. Queen endgames, you can guarantee Magnus's queen is in the middle of the board, controlling as many squares as possible. It was forced to retreat there to defend the B2 pawn. White's passer, White's only real hope to win this game will be to advance it later. But while black is deflected, while black is distracted away, looking for that white pawn, Magnus should be trying to activate his rook. There we go. And maybe the queen and knight combo might come into effect a bit later.
You really want that. You want that coordination to create some threats on the right side, especially because Hans's majors are all offside, far away from the black king. But still, that is quite much in the future, as once again the queen lands at the center of the board. Magnus's rook trapped to defend the pawn. There's a lot of shuffling going around. Can Magnus find progress? Does he start pushing the B pawn? He first creates more space around the king.
Man, slow and steady tends to win the race, just creating a nice hiding place for the white king on a light square a bit later. The king has been uncomfortable in the dark squares for a while now. So Magnus, he'll inch forward. The white king will step up one square. The white rook will try and improve itself. Nice pin there, though, from Hans Niemann, pinning the white knight. And the white rook steps up. It does feel like Magnus is making more progress. Hans has just been kind of shuffling around. Rook trade should be avoided here from Hans.
Big decision, and he does agree with that. He instead keeps the pressure, making sure that the white queen and rook stay true to defending that weak pawn. A queen trade also declined. He says, no Magnus, endgames for you this time.
Yeah, they know each other so well, these two players. Magnus thrives when queens are off the board. Hans does not want to see any real exchanges here. Maybe bishop for knight would be the only trade he's happy with, although that's far, far in the distance, hard to achieve. So the black rook, meanwhile, moves across. Magnus can still offer that queen trade. Bring the queen up onto the c6 square. There we go. Blocking the long diagonal, staring at the black queen and the black rook. Hans now forced into full back rank passivity.
All of his pieces, the king, bishop, rook, and queen on that home rank for Hans Niemann. And this is where we'll see Magnus's pieces starting to improve, take more landscape, chesscape in this case. He centralizes the queen, brings the rook to the D line. The only thing missing, get that knight to the center of the board.
Oh, it feels like it's coming. And just as the white f2 pawn was a target earlier, black's f7 pawn might be a target in the near future, especially if rooks come off. Magnus just shuffling. Oh, Tanya, the clocks are ticking down. Not that much action has been happening, but it feels inevitable at some point that the time scramble will cause one of the players to take a bit more risk and to do something a bit crazy.
I'm so impressed with Hans's ability to take the tension and the pressure that Magnus is putting him on and not giving up that queen trade. He keeps all the pieces on the board. Magnus's knight lands at the center, offering another trade, declined one more time. Hans keeps stressing on piece activity, but that f7 pawn, queen takes pawn, a big threat now.
Ooh, queen takes pawn has to be defended. Only move now for Hans Niemann. He has to defend that pawn. He cannot get greedy, cannot grab the white knight. The f7 pawn would drop with a check. The black bishop would drop after it. Magnus would be 2 pawns to the good. That's too many. And there we go. Hans Niemann finds the only move. He centralizes this time, defends everything, reestablishes the pin, and the white knight has to run.
This starts getting tricky. There's a big fork being threatened. Knight jumping on with a check to e7 with the bishop pin would win the game. He falls back with the rook, defending that square does Hans Niemann. Fully alert. h5, Magnus pushing that pawn, clamping down on the right flank. Hans puts pressure on the b3 pawn, defended.
Ooh, poisoned pawn now. The pawn moves forward. If the black rook had moved, there would have been a devastating knight check. Magnus now offered the trade of queens, but that is because his pawn might not survive that much longer. He might have to trade off here. How to keep the white pawn alive on b4. Magnus not looking happy. He might have missed this move.
And going into bullet territory are these two. Anything can happen. The endgame does arrive, and now for Hans Niemann, only one move to keep the balance. He needs to hit the knight, and he finds it.
He finds it, he blockades the pawn. The pawn is stuck on a dark square. If it ever moves forward, Magnus should win. As it is, it cannot move. And yeah, there we see Hans Niemann refusing to just get distracted with the black rook. The kings are now going to centralize.
Taking that pawn would have been absolute disaster for Hans Niemann, allowing the B pawn to move forward. But it is the white king that has to come ahead. We see the rook trade happen in now 3 versus 2 on the same side. This is tricky. It should be a draw, but what does should even mean in this scenario? With 41 seconds for Hans Niemann, can he save this?
Oh, Magnus, he's going into flagging mode now with a few extra seconds on his clock. An extra pawn, as you say, Tanya, should be a draw. I've even had this exact endgame myself. It's hard to make progress for white without trading off more pawns, getting it closer to the end of the game. Magnus is going to wait 40 moves. Then he's going to push a pawn. He's going to wait another 40, 50 moves. And, oh, is it a blunder? He's got the black king now out of the way. He's going to advance the white king. And he's made the breakthrough. Black's blockade on the light squares has been broken. Suddenly, Magnus Carlsen, endgame genius, winning.
And he's on autopilot mode. He didn't even think for a second after finding that breakthrough, that path for his king. And now with another weakness on the board, the knight will just reroute itself and win a second pawn. The lone remaining pawn for Hans Niemann. This is all over. 18 seconds on the clock. And that's it. Magnus Carlsen gets the first win.
Wow. Especially against the top guys in the world, his preparation is very deep. It's not broad, his opening repertoire. He specializes in certain openings. Will it be the Italian? It has to be. No, it's the Spanish opening from Hans Niemann as he brings out his bishop, applies some pressure. We saw this in the previous encounter when Magnus had the white pieces. Hans has learned a few things, and a Spanish clash here, a debate in the opening.
And this is where it does deviate from what we saw in the first game around, with Hans Niemann getting the bishop to a more conservative square, but Magnus Carlsen takes it out on the diagonal. And this just means that Hans comes forward. Now, this gets very exciting if we're going to see Magnus Carlsen push the H-pawn, push the G-pawn.
Exactly. Magnus first breaks the pin by retreating the dark squared bishop. This is still well-known stuff. Hans with a very quiet move. Notice how the white king hasn't committed itself, Tanya. Maybe, just maybe, Hans Niemann might be tempted to move the king in the opposite direction. Maybe just keep it in the center a bit longer, start pushing some pawns towards Magnus's king if given the opportunity. He's keeping all of his options open.
In a must-win, those are the kind of dynamics that you want to create. Kings on the opposite side. It's a race to each other's kings with a pawn storm right there. The knight comes out first. I think he might be heading there. Queen out of the way, and you're getting ready to get a castle going on the left flank. The H-pawn moves ahead. The bishop drops back.
Oh, and Magnus shaking his head. There's a hook. There is a pawn hook now. Magnus's last move, pushing the pawn to h6, could just initiate and could be a red rag here to a bull. Will we see Hans Niemann try and push forward with his g-pawn? I'm not sure after this last move, Magnus striking in the center just in time before there were any flank attacks, trying to open up some lines, but Hans must be tempted, and no, he goes castles. He gets his king to safety. Quieter waters now.
No pawn storm yet on the king side, but I want to point out, it looks like d4 might have just trapped Hans Niemann's bishop, but after a trade of that central pawn, you will have a square to run to with that bishop on e3. So d4, tempting, but doesn't get the job done just yet.
Doesn't do the job, but it's still played from Magnus Carlsen. He still wants to clarify things. He wants the bishop pair. He's going hunting for the white light square bishop. And if he is able to capture this piece, if black is able to throw some pawns down the board, then Magnus will have a very clear plan, very easy play. Hans Niemann, with an extra central pawn, though, might try to attack on the other flank. At some point, he might try and move his bishop out the way, maybe move his knight out the way as well, and start throwing his kingside pawns forward. It feels like white will play on the right, black will play on the left. It might be a race.
It's going to be a game divided on two halves right now for Magnus Carlsen. His most extended pawn, the D pawn, dictating that it's going to be the left flank for him. While for Hans Niemann, the idea of getting the F pawn moving up the board, it still requires a few moves. I'm really liking Magnus's idea of going C5, trying to break through with C4, getting all the action going on the central lines.
Exactly. And sometimes that's what you want, right? It might be a level-looking position, but you want an easy plan. You want the next 2-3 moves in your mind. You want to be able to pre-move, save a few seconds. Magnus is definitely going to be pushing this pawn next. Pretty much a guarantee. Maybe a knight takes bishop move first. But Hans, less clear exactly how he executes his plans.
Also for Hans, it's just so unfortunate that he can't save the bishop pair. You can't put it on the b3 square just yet with the d pawn hanging as well. The white bishop needs to stay connected to that backward pawn, which means Magnus very likely to get a pair. on the next move.
Exactly, and there we go. He's allowed the pair of bishops, and he will push his pawn to c5, and this is happening on the board right now.
Now we see you have to watch out for a c4 by Magnus Carlsen. Just feels a bit cagey for Hans Niemann, where he's the one who needs to be on the attack. Knight jumps forward, 2 attackers on the c5 pawn, 1 defender for Magnus Carlsen. The moment you bring out your queen to b6 feels like an idea. That's a developing move as well as a defensive one.
Exactly. Magnus most likely will start with that. He can defend with his knight as well, but we're always told, develop a piece that hasn't moved rather than move a piece for the second time that's already out in the action. We see an advantage for black in the first time, for the first time in this game. That's because computers love the bishop pair. If Magnus is able to hold those black pawns, then he's doing very well. But for now, some short-term pressure.
Magnus is just half a point away from grabbing the match win. What does Hans Niemann need to do in this position? If you're in Hans's corner, what are you telling him? Where is the counterplay coming from, David, for white here?
Oh, it's tough. If I knew, I'd be sitting there playing instead of these players, alongside these players maybe, but not easy. Hans Niemann, big questions ahead. He would love to get his bishop out the way, start throwing white's f-pawn, e-pawn forward, but it takes so long, such a slow plan. Black's pawns, maybe because they are so far advanced, would arrive first. Black's bishops as well, looking good. I would just line up my rooks, just try to activate those. 1 rook on the c-file, 1 rook maybe on the e-file. Ask Magnus how he's developing. Ask for the knight trade on your terms.
Well, if you ask Magnus questions right now, he said C, he said B. He's going to say A next as well. That A pawn is about to go up the board, dislodge the white knight on b3. Feels like a very clear path for Magnus.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's advantage black objectively, but also ease of moves. First, okay, Hans plays the most natural one, sliding his rook across, given a question mark. Very surprising, definitely the most natural move, but Magnus slides his queen across, attacking white's undefended bishop. The white knight as well in the center is en prise, it is hanging, so a knight trade guaranteed.
It gets the good move on it. You're up in your space, in the position, you trade those knights, the bishop comes out, vacating a key square for Magnus's rook to land on the c-file as well, with tempo.
Man, surprising to see Hans Niemann think here. He's got a forced move. He has to take the black knight, allow that trade to happen. I don't know what else he could be considering. The white bishop, knight are both hanging, double attack. Maybe he's looking into the future, a few moves down the line. There we go, knight's off the board. The white bishop now needs to retreat or be defended, but the black rooks are coming.
But that's the point. You spend those extra seconds before making the only move. You best have your response immediately ready. And this is the second time Hans goes into a thing looking for a square for his bishop.
Yeah, that shows how much he really doesn't enjoy or like his position right now. The bishop does take a step back. Again, the most obvious move. But as you pointed out earlier, Tanya, this whole maneuver, the reason the black queen sliding across was given an exclamation mark is because black gains time. Black's rook's now centralized, backing up the pawns. The other black rook is going to move. Black has an unchallenged light squared bishop, which could be the MVP long term.
Not just that, I just feel if Magnus breaks through with c4, you know, we're talking about a draw is all that's needed. He's going to be the one who's going to be pushing for his second win in a row.
Oh, can he do it now or soon? That is the big question. If Magnus is able to get there first before white is fully organized, we might not even really see a chance for Hans Niemann. He's done nothing wrong again, but there we go. Magnus, pawn sacrifice. He's making his move.
The big question right now, can Hans Niemann take the bait? Can he challenge Magnus Carlsen and force him to show his hand even? Pawn takes pawn. What is happening? You capture that back, knight takes pawn. I don't see a way to pin it and win it.
Yeah, you can pin it, that's already established, but to win it, you would need your bishop. And if the white pawn steps forward to defend this knight now, maybe there are better moves. Maybe the white queen should slide out the way the game goes on. But if you push your pawn, then boom, black takes this pawn at the side of the board. Due to the pin, the white knight is stuck, cannot recapture, as the white queen would drop off the board. Magnus would therefore get an advantage. Still bishops and strong pawns in the center of the board. The D pawn especially, it's a clearance sacrifice to try and force it through. It's a passer that's going to run.
The last move. Liquid pressure rising right now on Hans Niemann. If he can't capture that pawn, you know, this is where he was hoping he stopped Magnus's plan, but he absolutely has not. And with this, it's big advantage to the black pieces. Double bishop, open position, pawn storming up the board. Magnus looking chill.
Exactly. Magnus looking good. Hans moves his knight out the way. He has a threat. He wants to park his bishop in the center, attack the black queen, attack this pawn, win material, eliminate the most dangerous pawn in the position. But he just doesn't have time. Magnus here, so many tempting moves. Even if Magnus were to drop some pawns, the position is so open that the bishops are coming to life. And I think a good try from Hans Niemann this last move. At least he's planting the idea of a counterattack in Magnus's head.
It comes with a threat, and it's not easy to offer a bishop trade right now with a move like bishop d6. It would have led to e5, and just as I say that, Magnus Carlsen with a big move.
A big move, given a question mark, but the whole idea is that the pawn is overworked. If it captures the bishop, the knight would have fallen off. Question mark, Magnus is still x-raying the knight, the pawn behind it. Big advantage. Magnus can simply take back. Hans can barely touch anything. That is fantastic, that spot. Out of the blue for Magnus.
Just incredible stuff. Bishop takes pawn, full board awareness there on that right flank. And now Magnus Carlsen thinking, what does he want to recapture with? Does he take it with a pawn? Or he might have some other ideas. As long as the queen is connected to the white knight, the bishop on h3, you literally don't care about it.
And you can see on Hans's face a bit of a smirk. He's like, oh, I missed bishop takes h3. We all missed that move. Magnus was the only one who spotted it. And that could spell the end, or will it? Magnus hesitating now. Surely he just recaptures the pawn. Why not? Are there any tricks in the air? Is he seeing some ghosts? What's he working out right now?
I just worked out that white's knight is actually absolutely pinned. It can't move from that spot. Watch out for that g2 square. Knight takes pawn, queen takes pawn would be checkmate on the spot.
Exactly, the white knight stuck where it stands. Hans again, bit of a smile there. Shake of the head had come a bit earlier. He knows he's in big trouble, but Magnus still in the tank. We've talked about it earlier today. Long think, wrong think. Will we see Magnus try to be a bit flashy? He needs to keep things simple here. Best move, just pawn takes pawn.
It's a weird dynamic, you know, you move the black bishop away, it would allow the white knight into the game, but he does capture the pawn. Eventually, the white queen falls back, now eyeballing the pawn at the center of the board. Magnus pins that knight, but does this give white the ability to jump to the center of the board? Knight takes pawn, hitting black's queen, and it's on the board.
Ooh, Magnus, will we see a reaction? Losing his advantage, or at least a chunk of it, but still doing well with black. A draw is enough, so we probably don't read too much into that blunder. I think Magnus just trying to play it a bit safer. We know his love of endgames. Tanya.
David, only move territory. Magnus has to put the queen on g6 to keep his advantage. Everything else in Hans Niemann is back in the game.
Ooh, Magnus, he must resist temptation here to trade off the queens. He can take the white queen with his bishop. He has done. He's trying to keep things simple. Advantage gone, back to level. Should still be a draw, maybe with best play. Magnus, we talk about how strong he is in the endgame, but this is the best position Hans has had all game.
Absolutely. This is the match situation dictating the moves right now. Magnus needs only a draw to secure the match victory, to secure a spot in the playoff, and he's doing it in the simplest way possible.
Again, trying to trade pawns. That was a weak, isolated pawn. He's throwing it forward. Again, a3 is hanging. The black bishop has its laser vision over onto the queen side. Makes sense what Magnus has done. But Hans, can he create anything? He had very similar position earlier against Jan Nepomniachtchi. He was able to squeeze it and grind out a victory in a must-win situation. Can he do the same again today?
That's the big question. Pawns getting vacuumed off the board with this last move, and Hans has to find a way to keep the tension on. We see trades. We're going to see more trades as the bishop will eventually pick up the pawn, but first Magnus builds on the attack.
Great move there from Magnus. He knows that one of the pawns will fall. He knows that if rooks come off the board, if pawns are level, it should be closer to a draw. Hans throws a pawn away. That's to open up the white bishop, which was rather stuck, staring at its own pawn. It wants to enter the center, but Tanya, probably not enough.
Not enough, but at least creating an imbalance is Hans Niemann. He wants to plant that bishop on that central e5 square, defending the c-pawn, also eyeballing the d7 infiltration square for his own rook to slide over, hit the bishop on the 7th rank, hit the g-pawn on the 7th rank. That's Hans's idea.
He wants to get that rook in, that is for sure. But Magnus now is debating whether to capture a pawn. Black's bishop can still take on a3, or I was going to say trade off those bishops. He harasses the white bishop first of all, tries to kick away that piece from the center. That is a slightly annoying move for Hans. He wants to retreat the bishop, but it's only going to get hit further. And it does feel like Magnus, he's in control still, and such simplified position. 4 pawns each, only bishops, now only rooks once these traded off. This should now be getting closer to safety. Tanya, are all rook endgames drawn?
Well, especially when Magnus is in front of you and you need only a draw to secure the match win. I do not see how Hans creates his chances in this one. It's 3 versus 3. Magnus's rook beautifully placed behind the pawn, stopping its advance. The white king cut off. Hans Niemann's victory relies on a miracle, a mouse slip in this one.
Does look that way, or for Magnus to maybe forget about the clock, play a little bit too slowly. Again, Hans did defeat Jan Nepomniachtchi in a rook endgame, a very similar one earlier in the day, but there was just a little bit more complexity. His king was a little bit more active. White's king cut off on the back rank is the main reason why White has 0 winning chances here, or close to. But stranger things have happened. It's never over till it's over. Clocks are down to around 3 minutes now. Magnus pushing pawns. That black H pawn looking dangerous.
He is, and as the F-pawn moves forward, stopping the advance of that black G-pawn, the king ready to hide on the H-line. I'm not even sure which player is playing for the initiative here. Who is more ambitious about their chances?
And that's the thing. I'm sure Magnus would be happy with a draw. He'd be happy to move on. Best of 2, that would clinch it. But Hans Niemann, at some point you've got to provoke the opponent. Provoke the black king forward, for example. Try and checkmate it. No, we see more pawns vacuumed off the board, hoovered off the board. There we go. We're headed down to rook and pawn versus rook and pawn. Minimal flagging opportunity here for Hans Niemann. No time, simply. There's too much time on the clock. Magnus.
Are we going to see a draw here? With their history, with their hostility, with the high stakes that are on, are they going to play it till king versus king?
Well, we see 50 moves of rook versus rook before that inevitably happens. Tanya, we're going to find out the first question. Magnus is going to offer a rook trade. Rooks come off. Hans looks away. Magnus clinches it. A draw, enough to win the match.
Gets the first round win, draws without any hassle in the second one is Magnus Carlsen as he walks right off the stage. Comes back for just a moment, but that's about it. Magnus Carlsen gets the win. He will be in the playoffs. For Hans Niemann, he drops to the loser's bracket.
Magnus, it's a case of job done. He moves on.